Fantastic. All right, so with that, let me start sharing my screen. Okay, let's see. Doesn't look like we have any new faces this week. Small meeting again. So moving on to the next item here, review outstanding RFCs. We've got quite a few. Add initial version of RFC for semantic version tags. Where I remember this being before I took vacation was there was mostly just a need for a much more strongly worded statement that we weren't going to support backporting. I don't know where it's gone since then.
So last week we had just a bit of a short discussion about this. I don't know that anyone necessarily directly objects to the idea of doing a couple of different tag releases, although I think reading between the lines on what it seems like the original poster wants, I don't know that we get them to that place by doing what they're proposing. Primarily because it seems like what they want to do is be able to have a stopgap for breaking features inside the build packs. But they want to make sure that they can still continue to update their dependencies, which is something that we wouldn't guarantee in any way because obviously when we would cut a new release, we would just start putting the new versions on the old release and we wouldn't continue with the same version line. So I think, I mean, I don't know that it's particularly burdensome to add something like this, but I'm not sure that it actually accomplishes what the original poster of this RFC wants. And so I'm a little like touch and go on that, I guess.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. Like as long as the thing they bind to that's a major or minor happens to also be the same major or minor as whatever the latest version is, then they'll get the outcome that they're looking for, I think. But as soon as the major or minor changes, then they're kind of just orphaned and stranded back on this old version that they may not realize is never going to get updated ever again.
Exactly. And I don't know if that's abundantly clear to them. But yeah, I don't know. And I'm very hesitant to suggest any form of sort of, well, maybe we continue to keep minor lines updated or something like that. I'm really hesitant to do anything like that because that's very difficult in terms of doing releases, and then you have to have sort of these matrices where you test new versions against multiple lines, and yeah. Anyway, it's like I am like, yeah, sure, whatever. I don't actually think that I have a problem with the RFC. I think I have a problem with the underlying idea of what the RFC is trying to get at. So it's a little hard.
All right.
I think
I'm going to propose. No, go ahead, Dan.
I was going to say, I think there's some technical, not necessarily problems, but limitations of what they're proposing too. You could really only use this with pack build-b. It's not going to work in a builder or something like that because those are going to expect specific versions, and you won't get that with the way the labels are and what they're proposing. So I don't know. That isn't necessarily the biggest thing in the world, but they would have to call it out if we're going to move forward with this.
Yeah, considering that builders basically take the build packs and repackage them as just layers inside of a new image, I don't see how you ever could achieve what they're proposing with a builder.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, let alone like being able to version it to say something like, well, I only want PHP 8 or something. And like, what does that mean in the context of a builder as a tag? Yeah. Okay. I'm going to propose this, Forrest. I'd appreciate if you kind of outline in a comment the like concern about the fact that the RFC maybe doesn't, or the implementation maybe won't meet the need, the kind of underlying needs of the original poster, and we can take it from there. If they are like, yes, we understand, and that sounds fine, then like, I don't necessarily see the downsides to us just including a couple extra tags on the images that we create. Cool, sounds good. All right, next up on the list here, we have proposes RFC to add a low profile mode to memory calculator. It's a Java team one.
Yeah, this is a new one that we're trying to, so we're trying to address cases where users have less than 1 gig of container memory. Previously, the memory calculator, that kind of the tool that kind of decides how to allocate memory for the JVM, it would kind of just give up if you were less than 1 gig of memory, just because of certain requirements the JVM has. And it was really optimizing for a like high volume web server approach to things. And so it would calculate accordingly. But we're finding that there are use cases where, people are running apps, but not going to have, high volume web apps. And so we're proposing some different options here for how to make the memory calculator work with less memory, but still create some sort of useful calculation. So if anyone has feedback, let us know. We're going to probably let this one sit for a little bit because it's a fairly important change.
Awesome. Next up, adopt Oracle JDK build pack.
This one was another build pack that we got contributed. It's just another JVM provider. This one provides a recently released free JDK distribution that Oracle has. So just another one we can pull in. We'll probably move ahead with this one this week. I think we have enough votes already.
Awesome. Next up, we have this Go Bomb RFC. I don't know if either of the folks who wrote this are on here or if this got discussed at a previous working group meeting.
I can speak to this really quickly. We're just, so recently we did a bunch of work to try and get Node.js up to having like updating its bill of materials so that not only the Node engine and NPM and Yarn contributed a bill of materials, but we also got bill of materials for Node modules. This is a similar idea, which is doing the same except for Go mod apps. So getting Go modules and getting the creating a bill of materials for them. That's pretty much it.
Cool. It's a bunch of ongoing discussion there. If you're interested, you should go check out the RC and add comments. Let's see, next up, RSC to auto-generate reference documentation.
Yeah, this is myself and Victoria. We are currently working on an initiative to make reference documentation that is auto-generated or semi-auto-generated, that is contained inside of the Buildpack repositories to help our reference documentation stay up to date, and also to sort of spread the burden of documentation maintenance, not only to people who are subject matter experts, but to more people just in general. I think another goal of this is to make and expose the creation of documentation to new contributors so that we can hopefully make it part of the feature addition process in a more seamless way.
I know there's some ongoing discussion there. Anything else anyone wanted to talk about here?
The only thing that I would say is that you shouldn't, anyone on here or part of the Paketo community should feel more than happy to comment on this RFC. Obviously, some of the end users are people, new users coming to the site, but ultimately, when it comes to the actual maintenance and generation of the documentation, it's going to come down to maintainers that are already existing on teams. So y'all are a pretty critical user base that we would like to hear from and get feedback at this stage.
Awesome. Next up, we have, this doesn't seem like an RFC, just updates some links. Okay.
Yeah.
And then this last one also doesn't seem like an RFC. This just maybe moves a file around in a directory. Okay. I think that covers all of the outstanding RFCs. Next up on the list, we have auto-generated reference docs. Did we cover this already, or is there more you want to say for us?
I think this might be a holdover from last week's meeting. But if anyone wants to have any comments about anything that they've read in the RFC and wants to address those in a more public forum, I could do that now, or I can also go through and do that asynchronously through comments on the RFC itself.
I'm happy to have a lot of the conversation async. I just glanced at it earlier, and I saw that you had a lot of prior art there, which is helpful. And I just recalled there's, I think, a discussion in like Paketo feedbacks / discussions about like documentation and things that people need from it and stuff like that. If y'all haven't used that as a resource, I would encourage that as well. Yeah.
Cool. I'll take a look.
Okay. Next up on the list, we have follow up on Buildpack tooling discussion.
I think this is just a new standing item for us where we talk about what we are doing in the Buildpack authors working group meeting. There was one last week. I don't know. I have to look at my calendar. Anyway, I don't know that there's been any significant update. I think that new execd interface has been implemented inside of libcnb for those that's an interesting prospect. We also had a discussion with them, I think at the last Buildpack meeting, where we were encouraging the group to move forward on a simplified version of libcnb before adding larger library components, in order to sort of make it so that we could get to a place where we could actually unify on some common libraries more readily, because we're using the same base library. And there seemed to be yeah, that makes sense. We just need to talk about more things that might go into V2. So I don't really know exactly what the next step is. Let me check to see. Yeah, I don't know exactly what the next step is. Do you have anything, Dan or Frankie, to add?
No, nothing to add.
I noticed that we had that GitHub discussion. I think you opened it, Ryan, like maybe 20 days ago, about like how can Paketo like unify on tooling, which is sort of, I think, born out of the first conversation we had about this year. And I haven't seen a lot of movement on that thread. I know I haven't written anything there yet. And I was wondering if there are reasons that people don't feel like they can add to that thread right now. Like, are we blocked on something in order to really get into it, or is it just a question of people's time?
I'm a little unclear on what I'm actually supposed to add to that conversation. Like, I think that we've like, I'm unclear on where the libraries differ enough such that I wouldn't be able to readily pick up Bard or Crush or whatever other libpack/libcnb libraries there are. And I guess I just haven't had the time to go in and find out what the difference is. So maybe what would be, I don't know, maybe something to be helpful for me would be a catalog almost, in that discussion of sort of, here's cargo, here's what the general idea of cargo packages are, here's what the specifics are. And I mean, I'm more than happy to go through Packet and put some of that together. And so, like, you know, here's Scribe, here's some things of Scribe, here's the ultimate goal, maybe stuff like that, or maybe that's unnecessary. But I just don't know where I just don't know what overlapping libraries we have at this moment that where we would even begin to pick at that discussion.
I think certainly to start, my focus has been on libcnb and not really on libpack at all. I think my like immediate expectation was that if you could get libcnb to be closer to what Packet provides as its like core, like top level API, then we would be able to basically drop all of our code that we have in the top level directory of the Packet repository, because that would be hopefully at that point a near drop-in replacement for libcnb, and then we could just adopt libcnb. But that we would also be able to then rebuild any of the higher level or like optional packages we have on top of libcnb as a base instead of on top of Packet as a base. From there, I think the next steps are like, how can we start to converge stuff? But like, I think we're getting a little bit too far ahead of ourselves if we're like already talking about some of these optional things when we're like not even today on top of like a shared library that implements the spec. So for me, the big things I wanted to see were like folks pointing out or finding the discrepancies between what is available in libcnb and what is available in Packet at the top level, and us trying to figure out what do we want to propose as the API. For example, libcnb takes as its like argument to build, it's like build and detect functions, these like interface types, builder and detector. And I'm not necessarily sure that that makes a ton of sense and leads to quite a bit of extra boilerplate. I'd like to see if I could make an argument that we could get away with not having those things, and people who like the idea of an object like a builder or a detector could still continue to use those things. That's just like one example of like what it'd be interesting to see us start to have a conversation about. Another one being like service bindings. Do they live in the top level libcnb repository, or are they a sub package, considering that they're an extension to the spec and not part of the core Buildpack API spec? Right, the way they live today, they're implemented as top level concern in libcnb. I don't know. Those are just a couple of things that like I'm able to call off the top of my head. I know there are others, but
it's top level, but isn't it in an extensions package or something like that? I can't remember for sure.
I didn't think that it was.
And that would be interesting because there was that spec extension and then that got deprecated and now it's just a different spec outside of our project altogether.
Yeah, I think there is still like on the Buildpacks project, there's this kind of like open issue of like someone needs to go in and further clarify what the state of service bindings is for Buildpacks. Like it's near impossible to really divine what the actual current state of service bindings is as far as support goes for the Buildpacks like API. It's not documented anywhere other than like some RFCs that really kind of just point at what they think they want, but like what it actually means, like, are you adopting this other part of the spec as part of the top level API? Because the top level API that's written in the spec doesn't mention it at all. Like service bindings are not mentioned at all if you just go and read the spec documentation.
Yeah, it's a little weird because like we first had, there was the service bindings extension, and then the deprecation of that, and it just, you know, like in so that we could use the Kate's bindings instead. But it's like once you do that, like where do you reference from the CNB spec? Where's that trail that points someone to the Kate spec from the CNB spec? And I think that's either missing, or I can't remember if like the old binding spec is still in there under extensions. I can't remember, but I agree it's quite confusing.
I think it's currently marked as deprecated. Anyway, I just wanted to get the ball rolling to point out that there are some things here that clearly we can talk about. Feel free to like go ahead and throw that stuff in the discussion. I hadn't put the stuff I put in there because my focus before I went on vacation was on doing the like layer contributor removal PR that got put up. So I hadn't focused on like just discussing, but we should continue this conversation in that discussion.
There are potential risks too with, you know, outside any risks that we already have in mind. There's a risk of like I guess like support, for lack of a better term, that Paketo or certain companies like VMware might want to provide. And if they use libcnb under the hood, and let's say service bindings has some new version or whatever, and then they go and implement that and deprecate and eventually remove the old one, but certain companies like VMware may want to still support the old spec for some indefinite amount of time. We'd be sort of hosed, you know, if and have to just go manually re-implement the old version, because I don't think Go allows you to have two different versions of the same library in one project. So
I think technically it does, but there's like
interesting.
some gnarly implications to doing that.
Yeah.
Anyway, we can definitely go and like bike shed on this a whole lot more in a discussion. So feel free to like follow up on that. I'm gonna move on to the next topic, which was request for feedback from Cnb Docs.
Yeah, so at the most recent Buildpack author tooling subteam sync, actually before I talk, can someone take notes for this part? Just so I don't have to do both. Great, thanks Forrest. Okay, right, so at the most recent Buildpack author tooling sync of the Cloud Native Buildpacks project, one of the things that they talked about was around like the state of CNB's documentation. And you can look at the notes to see like some of the discussion that happened there, but one of the sort of takeaways was that, you know, we as Paketo are people who use the Cloud Native Buildpacks docs or don't because they don't help us. And so it would be helpful to CNB if we were to offer them feedback about the documentation, because they're sort of in a phase of they have a lot of open issues regarding documentation, which I linked to those issues in the original agenda bullet points. I can also send that in the chat now. They have a lot of issues open, and it seems like they have more issues definitely than they have capacity to just sort of say they're going to do them all now. And so feedback on like what documentation from CNB would actually provide the most value for Buildpack authors. So like ways that you could provide this feedback is like reach out to me through the Paketo Slack or otherwise. Another helpful thing to do would be just go to that set of issues and like upvote or comment on ones that are like, oh yeah, I definitely, need this documentation. This, the absence of this is hurting me. Like, for example, what you mentioned just now, Ryan, about service bindings, I think that's an excellent example. And for example, if you think something is important to be documented and there is currently no issue open about it, open an issue, and then, you could even signal boost it in the Paketo Slack, get other people to upvote it or whatever. So really the goal here is to use this assembled group of Buildpack authors to try and give them more information about how to help us better. Yeah. Any questions about that?
Awesome. Anything else last minute that's not on the agenda already? Fantastic. All right, I'm going to call it here. Thank you, folks, and we'll see you next week.